Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion Never Dies. In this episode, I interview Calvin Dyson, who was one of the first people to set up a James Bond-themed YouTube channel. You can find him on YouTube at Calvin Dyson, and I ask him, as a James Bond expert, what is the most British James Bond film? Okay, Calvin Dyson, thank you very, very much for joining me today. And I feel most people would know something about you, but would you like to give a quick thumbnail sketch of who you are?
Sure. Well, I'm Calvin Dyson, and I have a YouTube channel under that very name that I've been running for a good long while now, a scary amount of years, like 16, 17. Like, YouTube was new when I started, which was crazy, but I've been posting Bond-related videos there for some time, and I'm very happy that because we've known each other for a while now, we see each other at events and everything, but this is the first time they're actually recording, like, a podcast, a video, a Bond discussion together. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you very much for asking me on.
Thank you. And as you know, the whole podcast always asks the question, what is Britishness?
Mm.
And James Bond often comes up. As I travel around the world, people who've never met a Brit might say, well, Ling Ling Shi or 007 in Chinese or whoever, he's very, very British. So I was wondering,
Mm.
out of all the Bond films, however many you count, which one do you think is the most British and why?
Mm. Mm. Is this my cue to go in on it, shall I? Because I've
Oh,
given
do,
this an
do.
awful lot of thought. Like, ever since you mentioned about this question, it's really like it's been on my mind for weeks now. It's like, I'm really happy this conversation is going to be quite cathartic, I think, in just getting it all like out there. Because I do have to admit that, like, even when you first like posited the question, is that the correct word? Proposed the question? I don't quite know. The film that immediately sprung to mind, what is the most British Bond film? Skyfall was like the immediate, like, that's what went into my head for a multitude of factors. I'll be interested to know kind of what your take on it is. And I am very much aware that I'm also probably being influenced by the fact that Skyfall came out in 2012, which was such a big year here in the UK. There was the Olympics in London, of course, which was gigantic. There was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. I want to say Diamond.
Hmm.
Might be wrong there, but it was 60 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, obviously Daniel Craig did a little sketch with the Queen herself, like as part of the Olympic opening ceremony, which was mind-blowing and huge. And I'm not sure if it's yeah, how to convey just quite the magnitude of that.
Yeah.
Like the Queen herself being involved in such a thing was just, huge.
Hmm.
And the fact Daniel Craig was there, of course, as well. So Skyfall is coming out in the context of what I would describe as like a huge year for Britain in general, for multitude of factors. Personally speaking, I moved to London at the end of 2011. So this was just on my own sort of, experience of being British and finding myself
Mm.
living in the capital all of a sudden. And so I think that factors into it. There are a few other factors. Do you want me to go into those right away,
Totally.
or
The floor is yours. Yeah.
because there's I'm just sort of all the factors that sort of came to mind as I've mulled this over to sort of yeah, the most British Bond film. Those are sort of external factors outside of the film itself that nevertheless contribute
Mm.
towards my perception of this. In terms of the film itself, there's of course the fact that it is set, a lot in the UK, which
Mm.
is unusual for the majority of Bond films. I think in the Craig films, we got used to spending a bit more time in London as Bond spends more time with the MI6 gang and what have you. But Skyfall felt really like, from about like the halfway point of the film, Bond goes back to London and then, oh wow, it's like so much of the, finale action is obviously, set up in Scotland. All of the chase on the London Underground, like things like that you don't normally see in a Bond film. Like this,
Yeah.
the world is not
Yeah.
enough, of course, with the boat chase along the Thames and everything. Um,
As
but
it zips
Skyfall,
past.
yeah, exactly. Whereas, and yeah, like Skyfall doesn't do so much of the kind of what I would say the tourist sort of like travel log element of it to the extent that I think The World's Not Enough did, where you have those beautiful shots of the boat going past Parliament and what have you. and yet just being on the underground with Bond chasing the villains is on the tube, like things like that. And then going up to Scotland, like seeing another part of the UK as well outside of London in a
Mm.
Bond film is quite
Yeah.
unusual.
I will just
Um,
quickly say,
mm,
bypassing Yorkshire altogether, we never see that
yeah,
bit.
I know, terrible, isn't it? It's like when they have the graphic up on the screen where like Tanner and Q are tracking, the movements and stuff. Like, I would love to have had like a 5 minute interlude where Bond and M stop off at a service station, like just outside of Leeds or something. I would have loved that. And again, so that's very sort of text, I guess, in terms of the film's Britishness, but then also just on a subtextual kind of level. I just think that thematically there is so much in the film that I think resonates as part of a British culture or identity. I don't really know how to describe it, but the theme of duty that runs through the film, certainly from Bond and M's perspective, I do, consider the sense of duty as a very British trope, perhaps.
Mm.
And maybe it's just the fact that Judi Dench has played Queens in the past in her career that I associate her with royalty. But the fact that Bond's primary goal, towards the end of that film at least, is defending her. And
Mm.
it's this sort of, the climax being in the Skyfall house, Bond, M, and Kincaid are defending their fortress from invaders that have them outnumbered. Their little island is being surrounded and they're coming for them. It almost feels like Bond is defending the Queen in a
Yeah.
strange way, which again I think contributes to that sort of overall factor of Britishness.
Yeah, and particularly Judi Dench had played Queen Victoria in Scotland in Mrs. Brown.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. No,
So
of course.
it
Yeah.
matches weirdly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's strange, isn't it? There are other films that did spring to mind that I was mulling over and considering, and I'm curious to hear your take on it because maybe we, align on one of these films. But Skyfall for me, as I say, it was the first one that sprung to mind, and then I was like thinking, like, no, can't just be that, can it? And then sort of going through the others and sort of really mulling it over, I was like, oh no, actually, I think for me, most British Bond film, it's Skyfall. But I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are. Like, if you have like one that like stands above the others as like most British of all.
Oh, sure. And it depends on what we get into, right? So if you have as a setting, then it becomes more and more British as we go along, right? Bond spend more and more
Mm,
time in England as the series goes on. When I talked to Raymond Benson, I was really interested because he's an American writer who does the continuation books for Bond. And he was
mm,
saying they are international, but they connect to parts of the world that connect to Britain. And there's always a
mm,
British angle, 0 - 10 being Hong Kong, Facts of Death being Cyprus. Most of
mm,
the films do that. I find
mm.
my least favorite or least watched Bond films tend to be like the American set ones, like Live and Let Die,
Ah,
because it's
right.
really leaning into US interests, which makes sense for the audience and makes sense for Bond, but doesn't
Mm,
resonate personally.
mm,
Whereas
mm.
things like The Man with the Golden Gun do.
Right. Now that's interesting because I did wonder if we were gonna sort of get onto like what are the least British Bond films, which I think Live and Let Die is a contender for
Hmm.
one of those. License to Kill is one that sprung to mind, and I feel like a part of that is because I mean they filmed it. Did they film any of it in the UK? I'm sure there was like
No,
special
no.
effects work or something done in the UK. I'm sure, but for the most part, it was Mexico, wasn't it? It
Yeah, they
was.
even flew Miss Moneypenny all the way to Mexico to construct her office in London.
It's crazy, isn't it? And I don't know if just that, yeah, that. Oh, I think it might even be the only film in the series where Bond doesn't even set foot in like
Mm.
Britain himself. But so that one immediately sprung to mind. It's a film that I really do love, by the way.
Yeah.
But just in terms of sort of the Britishness of
Mm.
it, it did stand out. And again, no, I think you're right. I think it is the sort of the American ones because If You Two Are Kill's another one that I think of as being very, and maybe it is because there just aren't many scenes set in the UK in them.
Yeah. There's a horse
Um,
racing at the beginning, and I always think it looks like every Saturday afternoon TV show of,
yeah. Oh,
Murder
of
She Wrote
course,
or
yes.
whatever. But apart from a
Yeah,
horse
yeah.
race of all of them in their finery, that's kind of it.
Yeah, no, you are right. You are right. Yeah. So do you have a most British Bond film yourself?
I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. I'm still
Ah,
trying to work out,
right.
is it a villain who targets British interests? Is it a location
Mm,
that connects to Britain? Or is it James Bond
mm,
himself? Because I asked this question to John Glen, and he was like, well, Roger Moore
mm.
was just the most English person ever.
And then you're saying, well, Fleming was also like one of the most English people ever, and so anything from Fleming automatically just is so British. So he connected it to
Yeah.
like the individuals who worked on it.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's very because one of the other films that I was considering for title of most British Bond film was Majesty's Secret Service, which is perhaps ironic considering that it's an Australian man playing James Bond in that. But again, that was another one. The Union Jack is right there in the opening title sequence. There are quite a few scenes set in London, and
Mm.
the Bond goes back there towards the end of the film and everything. The title, of course, on Her Majesty's Secret Service is such like a
Yeah.
British title.
And much of the plot is
But
around, Blofeld wants these titles, and it's just snobbery.
mm,
Right? Like, how
right,
much how
yes,
much more British can you get that the villain is just a snob? He wants
exactly.
titles.
Yeah, a very key British attribute there, snobbery. It's like if Hyacinth Bucket was a Bond villain or something.
I noticed
It's
you're
yeah.
pronouncing it bucket. Okay, not bouquet.
Yeah, I paused for a split second there, to sort of like, how am I pronouncing that? I've been rewatching a lot of Keeping Up Appearances recently, so I think it's very much on my mind. Go on.
Just on that, keeping up appearances. So, the
Yeah.
sitcom is outrageous and her behavior is outrageous. And the actress was asked, how do you feel playing these kind of unreal, snobbish characters? And she said, no, 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 no.
Mm.
This isn't unreal. People behave like this
Mm.
for a moment. And we're showing like
Mm.
the moment. So sometimes I think in Bond films, you see that. You see something really outrageous, but sometimes they're like, yeah, for a moment, someone could be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, no, that's cool to hear her take on that. I saw an interview where she was talking about, because her husband Richard in that series is very like henpecked and just
Yeah.
like very sort of like just wants to have a quiet life, and he's just dragged into all of these, scenarios by his wife. And the interview asked like, why are they together like as a couple? It's sort of that question of
Mm.
like, well, why are Basil Fawlty and Sybil Fawlty together? And
Yes.
Patricia Routledge's answer to that was because he loves her. His,
Hmm.
shirts are ironed and there's a good square meal on the table at the end of the day. What more do you want? And it was like, yeah, I guess that's as good an answer as any.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Spy Who Loved Me was another strong
Mm.
contender for me for most British Bond film. Again, it's another one where Union Jack is right there in the title sequence. At, the end of the pre-titles, obviously, like the parachute coming up and the Bond theme blaring and all that. But also just seeing Bond in his commander gear
Yeah.
and that sequence sets, where he's on the submarine and everything and talking to the Minister of Defense and they're walking along and there's that great shot where the submarine is like, in sync with their walk, basically, as they walk along, which is just it's something about that just really, yeah.
I definitely see that as one of the more British films because
Mm.
it really tries to situate Britain as somehow arbitrating between kind of America and Russia. And it may be
Mm.
a bit of a fantasy role, but you did, in the 80s, you'd have comedians walk on, one who's pretending to be Gorbachev, one pretending to be the American president, and one pretending to be Margaret Thatcher, right?
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
did have that theme quite a lot in the 80s of this is our
yeah.
role to be in the middle of those two.
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, that was the theme again in You Only Live Twice, wasn't it?
Mm.
That scene at the very start of the film where you've got the representatives of the countries in that thing, and the Britain's right there in the middle, sort of
Yes.
mediating between the US. It's yeah, no, it's interesting.
I'll confess, one of my less watched Bond films, and it might be that people often describe Connery as really good in the hard, gritty films, and You
Mm.
Only Live Twice, where they dye him so he blends in seamlessly with the Japanese.
All right,
This
yeah,
may have an issue for me when people say, "Oh, it got silly when it was Roger Moore," and I'm like, I don't think it did. I
yeah.
think I think there might have been an element of silliness, just a little bit before.
Oh, absolutely. Diamonds Are Forever as well. That's another one where it's like,
Hmm.
oof, yeah, no, no, they really went for the comedy there.
Yes, yeah. So Diamond's definitely one of the less British films. I can't see much connection there. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's probably an interesting, yeah. I'm sure in the US now there's a, American sort of culture expert sort of, having a podcast about the most American Bond films and having conversations. Yeah, because Diamonds would certainly be up there.
And there's also been, as in academic kind of writing, there's also been discussion of sometimes Bond's patriotism is serious, right? In Skyfall, it's as
Mm,
serious as you can get. The Spy Who
mm,
Loved Me, the Union Jack parachute is a bit hokey and so on. And sometimes it's played more for sub Austin Powers, but it's made more for
mm.
a laugh, and sometimes it's more serious. And there's
Mm.
discussion where that reflects the general culture, right? So Skyfall, like you say, was
Mm.
sitting in that cultural kind of positivity about our nation.
Mm.
And so they leaned into that. They exist in our culture, not outside
Mm.
it. Whilst no time did I had an element of cynicism towards the establishment of, M creating the super weapon for good, not for evil.
Mm. No, no, you're right. They certainly deal with a lot of sort of more morally grey subject matter in No Time to Die. And of course, Bond himself, he, retires and goes off grid and everything. He doesn't go off grid in the UK. He goes off grid
Mm,
in, Jamaica. He goes off to, yeah, somewhere else, which is yeah, no, I hadn't really considered that. But yeah, I wonder how much of that was conscious on the part of
mm,
the filmmakers, like, with Skyfall in particular, like, when they were conceiving of it, was it kind of part of the thinking was, well, it's going to be a big year for Britain, so it makes sense for, the story to be more set in Britain. But yeah, interesting.
yeah. And when they're planning these films out, it's a few years before
Mm,
they come out, of course. I don't think I'd have been
mm.
thinking about it in 2010 of, oh yeah, we're going to be really
Yeah.
serious about our nationhood in 2 years' time. There must
Yeah,
be
no,
great
exactly.
sensitivity.
Yeah, and it was that. I mean, we would have maybe have had the 23rd Bond film sooner if there hadn't been the problems with MGM and stuff. So
Mm,
sometimes these things are just sort of like a happy coincidence in a lot
mm.
of ways. Because I do think of Skyfall as being a supremely 2012 film. Like
Yeah.
that film could only have come out that year, and it was
Mhm.
just perfect that it did. And I still, yeah, I mean, I know unadjusted for inflation, it's still the highest grossing Bond film there is, and I think that
Oh,
that's like, oh yeah, because it was released in this sort of atmosphere of just yeah,
mm.
Britishness, British pride, Britain on the world stage, and everything.
Yeah. And talking of bits of the franchise permanently frozen in time,
Mm.
James Bond Jr. is all about a boarding school. And
Mm.
it's hard to think of something more British. My wife is American, and she's been
Mm.
encountering, she's a school teacher, like all these stories about boarding school that she doesn't grow up with in America. Like it seems a really, really British thing that we obsess over the type
Mm.
of schools that a very small proportion of our population go to.
Right, yeah, yeah, no, that's interesting, that isn't it? It's James Bond Jr. is such an odd one because it because it is so Americanized.
Mm,
Like they are like the boarding school is set in the UK, but it's how the backgrounds are painted and everything. It's like sometimes you wonder if the people working on it ever actually stepped foot in Britain. And James Bond Jr. himself has this kind of slightly transatlantic accent
mm.
because that it's American. They were wanting to appeal to a broad base, of course, and it was in the coming off Transformers and
Yeah.
He-Man and like all of those like classic sort of 80s American
Teenage Mutant
cartoons.
Ninja Turtles. I mean, or Hero
Precisely.
Turtles, depending which territory you're in. But yeah.
Oh, really? Do they change
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, the title
Oh.
changes. Yeah, depending where you are, whether ninjas are considered too aggressive and too adult, so it should be changed to hero. So yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. One of my favorite cartoons when I was a kid was called Beast Wars. It was like a spin-off of Transformers. And I know that in Canada they had to call it Beasties because the
Oh,
wars part of it was not deemed suitable for kids' TV. I don't know what they call Star Wars then, if that's or maybe that gets a free
yes.
pass. But yeah.
We were talking about the early days of the internet with your YouTube, and I can remember
Mm.
when Google was fairly young, they introduced the safe search. So I searched for something Star Wars, and that was all blocked. You're trying to
Ah,
access content that is forbidden because it had the word wars in it.
ah,
I couldn't show.
interesting.
Worst day of my life. Couldn't search Star Wars on the internet.
Yeah, you don't think of it as being such a controversial sort of word, but I guess, different territories and what have you. And of course, Bond has had just on the subject of ninja, you know, um, in Tomorrow Never Die. It's probably a bit. Not sure if this is like specifically a ninja thing, but the shuriken is it pronounced shuriken?
The
The
throwing
circular,
stars.
yeah, throwing stars. That's it. Like they were cut out of the film for the British release for much of it. So until the Ultimate Edition DVD came out, I think that was the
Mm.
first time that it was sort of like yeah uncut
There's a
in
few bits
Britain.
of violence cut out for the UK, and I understand it's the
Mm.
sex scene in Dawn of the Day that gets heavily edited for North America. That tends to
Yeah,
be
I've
the
heard that.
case.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That difference between, yeah, is the sex or the violence more objectionable depending on your territory?
Absolutely. on the topic of Bond's Britishness, I was thinking that Quantum of Solace has one of the most British moments, which is the point where he's had, is it six Vespers in the aeroplane?
Are you implying that that binge drinking is
Uh,
a significant part of British culture?
I believe it was Honest Trailers when they did No Time to Die. They said this is the film that asked the question: Is James Bond an alcoholic or is he just British? As I travel around the world, I don't come across other fictional heroes in other cultures that are heavy drinkers. But I
Right.
believe in the comic books, Iron Man struggles with alcoholism, but that's obviously been cut for the movie version. I think there's only the barest hints of it in the early ones.
Oh,
But
interesting.
but we do
Huh.
tend
Well,
to have alcoholics, and of course, with Sherlock Holmes, a drug addict in the British stories,
right.
and he only became
Yes.
less of a drug addict when they started selling the stories to American newspapers, and they objected to it.
Huh. Oh, that's so interesting. Huh. Because obviously, vodka martini shaken not stirred. It's such like a part of Bond, and I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's statistics out there as of like how many he drinks in every, but it's a very, potent drink. It's a very strong drink,
Yeah,
and you are sort of used to, because just thinking about, what you said then about Iron Man, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess it's like in films like that, it's often when the hero is at rock bottom that you see him like, just drinking. And I suppose in Quantum of Solace, Bond is at,
mm,
rock bottom in that moment, emotionally speaking. But yeah, I mean, throughout the films, we see him, knocking back a fair few much. In No Time to Die, I love that moment where, him and Paloma cheers and then, have the martinis. And then later
yeah.
on, when he falls down, he's behind the bar, he pours them a couple of shots and then they, go off for the action. I like that. There is something about that feels very like true to sort of British drinking culture.
Absolutely, yeah. And I was just talking to a friend of mine from China who she visited the UK a couple of years ago for the first time. So she was just in the
Mm.
UK in London, and she just never seen like all these people after 5 o'clock, they finish work, they go out and they're just standing on the street drinking. And
Oh
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
completely alien to her experience. Like I
Huh.
should say outside bars, not just randomly around. But it's not like some
Yeah.
American states where they're in brown paper bags or anything like that. You can open carry a beer.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, exactly. Like that was something that I was in last in America a few years ago, and it was a real thing of like, I think in Europe on large, I think just we have a pub culture, cafes that might sell wine and things like that, and if you fancy sort of like on holiday mid-afternoon, post lunch drink is perfectly acceptable. And we were in San Francisco, like wandering around, and it was like quite difficult to find just like a cozy, pub sort of, scenario for us to just like have a, a mid-afternoon drink because, there's a lot of I think is it they refer to as like dive bar kind of things
Oh
where
yeah.
it's, there was a lot of that but it was yeah not quite the same as in I mean I was out just last night and again it's sort of like in central London Soho it's I arrived at 5 o'clock and people are already like stood outside pubs with pints drinking and it's
Yeah.
it's just what
It's
people do.
it's respectable and middle class, which is what
Mm,
a lot of
yeah.
cultures I've engaged with haven't had. So, in Turkish
Mm.
culture, very strong drink exists, but it's not like a middle class behavior to go out and have a
Huh.
drink or to have a drink with a meal or anything like that.
Interesting. Do,
Uh,
do people like drink at home then? Is that or is just alcohol just not like much
It
of
it
a
has
social
bad
thing?
cultural, yeah, it's not much of a cultural thing. It has bad cultural
Uh,
connotations for the most part, unless you're at like the very top or the very bottom of society, is I
oh,
think the way I'd say it.
interesting. Wow. Huh. I didn't know that. Because obviously you grow up with it
Hmm,
here. It's just yeah. No, you go to the pub. It's just
yeah.
what people do.
And pubs are family friendly as opposed to the American bars are like
Mm.
where adults go to drink. Whereas a pub, like you watch a football match there, or you meet your friends, or you have a meal, or like it's quite multifunctional.
I hadn't considered that, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like in a way, maybe to people from other places, it might seem quite odd for a pub to be a family friendly place,
Yeah.
but it is. I mean, around here, I live in Wimbledon, and we've got quite a few lovely pubs, and
Hmm.
for a Sunday roast, it's lovely to go, particularly when it's a nice spring day, unlike the day that we're recording this, which is sleet and snow outside, but. But yeah, Sundays, it's like families
Hmm.
will just bring their kids and just park themselves in pubs for like 2 or 3 hours as they have big roasts and the kids run around and just like play and stuff. It's just such an ordinary thing. Has Bond ever
Absolutely.
been in a pub? I'm trying to.
I think in the novels, but not in the movies. Like he doesn't go to
Yeah,
an
yeah,
English country pub. Like he has the opportunity, I guess, in the Living Daylights, but he just drives past them. But there's a lot of
yeah.
British things Bond doesn't do, right? So you,
Mm.
you might be familiar with the account "Very British Problems," right?
Oh,
It's
right.
a
Yes, yes.
Twitter account, and I every time I read them, I try and imagine Bond having this problem because it's things
Mm.
like apologizing to inanimate objects for bumping into them, or the cup of tea isn't at the perfect temperature, and obviously he doesn't drink tea, or
Mm.
it's the social awkwardness. Like it leans into British people are socially awkward, which like Bond, social awkwardness is frightened of James Bond.
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I do think that when he's on the tube and just go back to Skyfall again, when he's sort of, after Silver and he's making his way through. I mean, I like that in the film they call it out where, Q says not something you're used to, or I
Yeah.
can't remember exactly what the line is when Bond's saying about like, oh, I'm down here along with half of London. But the fact that he's just like, walking all the way down the tube without being like, excuse me, sorry, excuse me, sorry, excuse
Yes.
me. Which is what he would probably do if he were, yeah. But no, that is interesting about there being elements of British culture that he doesn't really engage with, or we don't
Mm.
see him engage with in the films. And I do know that a part of that is somewhat conscious. I think Sam Mendes talks in about Skyfall about representing London and how they chose to do it. And we're seeing a lot of underneath London, of the tunnels and everything, because you don't tend to see Bond like on a street walking past a Primark and a Pret-a-Manger, and what we consider to be very sort of like typical high street shops and things. Even if he's in America, he doesn't go to a Macy's or anything like
No.
that. Bond's world is slightly separate from civilian society in a lot of ways,
Mm.
I think. Um,
Like one of the common criticisms, he's a spy supposed to blend in and he wears these expensive suits. And I'm like, but he's trying to blend in with like the richest people in the world. He's trying to be taken
yeah,
seriously by the top 1%,
yeah,
of
yeah,
wealth.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, he's not going to put on his grey jogging bottoms and like a gym top. Yeah,
Exactly. He's an investment banker interested in hostile takeovers. It's a different
yeah,
world.
exactly.
So I noticed that we've covered a bit of Connery, we've covered a bit of Daniel Craig.
Mm,
Yeah, so George Lazenby as the Australian
mm,
Bond, and obviously Brosnan comes from, an Irish background. Sometimes
mm,
the other perspective is really interesting, right? So I think the best
mm.
portrayal of Queen Elizabeth I is Kate Blanchett, who is Australian as
Huh,
well.
mm.
Sometimes that external perspective on Bond is really interesting.
Yeah, no, no, it is. It's with Brosnan. Yeah, maybe it's because I mean, I think of. Well, he spends a lot of time in Die Another Day in London as well, actually. Like,
Hmm.
they're at the Blades Club and then he's around MI6 quite a bit. He's in Q's, tunnel, everything. Because I was going to make a bit of a sweeping statement saying, like, I don't think of his films as being especially British.
Yeah.
And yet, there's quite a bit set in London, but I don't know if because at that point they were trying to sort of appeal to, an American
Hmm.
audience and stuff, and I think that's reflective in casting Denise Richards, Halle Berry, Terry Hatcher, these, big American actresses in significant parts. Yeah, in terms of Brosnan's own perspective, I think, where was it? I was reading an interview that he did recently about, I think they put that question to him about how does it feel playing, a British character when you're Irish, and I think, or how does it feel being mistaken for British when you're actually Irish? And I think he had a very sort of like it doesn't bother me too much, as he said, and because his own accent is a bit of sort of like a hybrid sort of
Hmm.
Irish English American sort of thing. He has that transatlantic sort of quality about him, which is interesting. I love that when he said that he had trouble getting the correct pronunciation of R for John Cleese's character in Well Is Not Enough. He was always really tempted to go R, like, proper Irish accent on it.
As Dalton's northern accent comes out growing up in Derbyshire sometimes.
Oh, yes, yes. Things
I
are
quite
about
like
to get.
Sean Bean just giving up. Um, like giving up the accent. Like he starts off with an accent that's quite RP-ish and just gives up
Yeah.
partway through the film. I think, yeah, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, towards the end when he starts getting a bit more shouty and the action really kicks off. But it's fantastic seeing behind the scenes interviews where he's on the set and in the costume as Alec and everything, but he's just doing his usual Yorkshire sort of accent. I love it. I love Sean Bean. I think he's a
Oh,
great actor.
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so often with the Brosnan era, they say that they try to make it more polished and more American, but I think fair to
Mm.
say British culture at that point was looking at kind of a globalized version of ourselves. I think,
Mm.
again, like Skyfall trying to be very, very authentically British, I think his
Mm.
era reflects where we were at that point.
I think you're right, actually, because it's very much, the Blair era, era of British politics, and the special relationship with Clinton and George
Mm,
H.W. Bush was, a big talking point. I mean, I remember I was quite young at that point, but I
mm,
remember sort of becoming. Funnily enough, I was having a conversation with a friend about this the other day about what was the first like British prime minister that you became aware of, like, because
mm,
I was born when Thatcher was prime minister, but
mm.
Blair was the first one that I remember having a conscious sort of understanding of like what that person is, and Tony Blair was a name that I knew, and who he was, and I do think that the Brosnan films are quite reflective of that era. I think they are very
Mm.
90s, they're very Britpop, they're very yeah, global looking and global reaching, I think.
Do you think you could imagine the Spice Girls walking in one of the backgrounds? Like we had Madonna,
Absolutely.
but okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. They could have been, Elliot Carver's warm-up act. I know that that scene's in Hamburg, but
But
they could
yeah,
have been
yeah, fair
before
enough.
he goes on stage.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's now my head canon. It does happen. We just don't see it in the film.
Yeah,
And of
exactly.
course, we have only one film where the Prime Minister actually appears.
Yes, For Your Eyes Only, of course, which, yeah, I did give that some consideration, and then I was sort of like, I don't know if much of the rest of the film
Yeah.
has much of that, but it is. I mean, and that the idea of spoofing a political figure, like, I don't know if it quite
Mm,
like leans into satire, but satire is a big part of British sort of culture as well.
yeah.
I think we have quite a history of that, of sort of poking fun at political leaders and what have you, and
Because
I
the man
guess
who
that's
plays Margaret Thatcher's husband is John Wells, who wrote satires of them for like 10, 11 years, and then
I did not know that.
he played Dennis Thatcher on stage, and Dennis Thatcher went to see it in the Dear Bill play. So,
Wow.
so he was renowned at the time, yeah, for playing
God,
Dennis Thatcher.
I did not know that. I know that was her name June Brown,
Yeah,
who
couple
played
of
Margaret Thatcher. Yeah, I know
there's a
that
couple
she
of
played
impersonators who
Thatcher.
got also got mistaken not only for Margaret Thatcher but also for each other, and they had an agreement just to go along with it because the two of them are just so famous. I think it's Janet Brown. You're right that it's this one.
Janet Brown, that's it. Yeah. Um, but yeah, that scene does stand out
Hmm.
as because yeah, it is the only we have a member of Parliament in Skyfall, of course, played by Helen
Hmm.
McCrory. Yeah, Helen McCrory. But I'm trying to think of other political.
But she's
Timothy
playing a
Pigott Smith's.
fictitious member of Parliament. So this is the
Yes,
only
very
one
true.
because I'm always astonished they took a risk. They actually portrayed a real prime minister because you never know what's going to be in the
Mm.
headlines tomorrow. Um,
Yes, yes, no, very true. And particularly to be such like a crucial figure in the ending of that, like that whole sort of
hmm.
scene is very much dependent on Margaret Thatcher's talking to a parrot and she doesn't realize it kind of thing. And it's, I
Yeah,
don't know if you could have like snipped that out for some sort of made up dignitary or what have you, but it's yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I have read that this was a last minute replacement. They wanted a Prince Charles impersonator, but the impersonator, I believe, got into some legal trouble, so they quickly changed it around to Thatcher.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I did not know that. I was wondering if you'd managed to get that out of John Glen in your interview that didn't quite make the cut or
I,
something, but
I'm reaching
yeah.
for where I've heard this, and I hope it wasn't just in a pub. But yeah, I'd agree. We'd have to jettison much of the film to have For Your Eyes Only as a very British film.
Right. Yeah.
I think we'd
Yeah.
struggle. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
perhaps GoldenEye it has an interesting point because it reflects on Britain's past bad behaviour. And again, that's
Right.
not something we generally get, from films around us, other cultures around us.
Mm.
That reflective, maybe we did something terrible in the past. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe that is sort of a yeah hint of the sort of cynicism or something to not be proud of, sort of making it into the series at quite a early point, like we talked about it, sort of towards the end of Craig. But that is an early example of it. Yeah.
Okay, from Lienz Cossacks, we're looking at a very bittersweet part of our history, the bitterness of the Lienz Cossacks in the victory.
Mm.
Bittersweet endings are not so uncommon in British storytelling, right? Even from King Arthur, often we talk about, well, Le Mort de Arthur is the death of Arthur. So even in the title of the writing, we know where it's going. We have the death of one of our heroes more recently, don't we?
Mm. Yes, yes, in No Time to Die, of course. Beautiful segue, by the way, there to go from Leon's Cossacks to No Time to
I
Die.
was working on that. I was working
No, that is
on
brilliant. Um, yeah, no, it's interesting. And it does feel like it on the page in the Flemings, obviously the Man with the Golden Gun, it does have sort of a bit of a, it's Bond in a hospital room and getting congratulations and, girl next to him and everything. It's a very sort of in a way it doesn't feel terribly authentic to Fleming that is the ending. Whereas I think if the books had have ended with "You Only Live Twice," which doesn't have Bond die like in No Time to Die, but it does have him sort of living a quiet life as a fisherman in Japan with memory loss and all that kind of stuff. Which again, it's just that speaking to your point about the bittersweet ending, it's like it kind of is there in the books, even
Yeah,
though Man with the Golden Gun came out, and I know we have to take it with a pinch of salt because Fleming was writing it at the end of his life, basically,
yeah.
and you know, who knows
And
if he might have changed things in subsequent drafts, what have you.
From Russia with Love has a very ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
And I like that Skyfall really takes it from Sherlock Holmes, the Reichenbach Falls. Like
Mm,
that's
mm,
what the scene is. It's the death of Sherlock Holmes. So
yeah. Yeah. But No Time to Die is an interesting case because I know from off record that you're a fan of the film
oh,
and a fan of
hugely,
the
yeah.
ending. It's like whereas I'm less so like it's a frustrating film for me because it has some of the highest highs of Craig's tenure for me and some of the lowest lows. The fact that he dies at the end, as it is in the film, is something that I'm not a fan of. But I always caveat that by saying, but I am not against the concept of Bond dying.
Hmm.
Like, I just think how it's handled in the film, I have issues with. But the idea that he dies at the end is to your point of, you can certainly speak more to other British characters and, how they meet their ends and everything. But I suppose it wasn't really something that I considered until you brought it up about like, oh yeah, no, it is a bit of a sort of a trope for there to be a bittersweet element to a British hero's,
Hmm.
or a British author writing for characters, what have you, to their end. And Bond certainly has that with Daniel Craig. I think now every other Bond has a very positive sort of like
Yeah.
just about to have sex or just having had sex in some lovely location.
Talking to a
Um,
parrot,
yeah, yes, exactly. Whereas, yeah, No Time to Die is a bit of a special case in
Hmm.
that regard, and yet feels very appropriate for Craig's arc. Like, if any Bond was going to die at the end of their run, it would be Craig's Bond.
Yeah. Yeah. If it was Roger Moore, it would be freakish.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's going to slip in the shower at the end of A View to a Kill, and
That's another soap. Um, believe the actual dialogue. And it is pointed out to me, right, with Lord of the Rings, right? So if it was a purely American adaptation, then the end crowning, that would have been it. The film can finish. And I
Mm,
know lots of people who wished it ended then, but instead they extended it on. And the actors
mm.
themselves said that they were having to cry on set for days and days and days of just fighting
Yeah.
through the headaches to do it for that bittersweet ending that British audiences
Wow.
demand.
Yeah. And that's it. I suppose it's very British in the sense that there aren't many tears. Like Hugh is definitely holding back a tear.
Mm.
He has a bit of a deep breath moment. Madeline is crying, of course, but she's French,
Yeah.
so that's. But all of the British characters are, of course, being very reserved and you
They
know,
have a stiff drink.
yes, exactly, exactly. They toast with a stiff drink, and there we go, back on with the job.
Mhm.
Which again does feel very. There's a very British quality to that. That it's this
Mm.
small moment of recognition, and then right back to work. Just well, got to
Yeah,
get
very
on with it.
dutiful, right? You mentioned the
Yeah.
duty as being part of it.
Yeah, no, I suppose that is a recurring theme throughout Craig's tenure in general. I think that
Mm.
perhaps more so than, or maybe it is through the whole series, but yeah, it certainly feels more pronounced for Craig, I think.
Well, I always think Daniel Craig is doing it because it's a duty. He's miserable about it, right? Timothy Dalton,
Right.
he's willing to do the job. He doesn't want to, but he's willing to do it. Roger Moore
Yeah.
loves the job. Right?
Yeah.
The man with the golden gun is entirely predicated on the fact this man doesn't want to take annual leave. Like he's determined to use
Yeah.
his annual leave to get back into the mission he wants to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, that's exactly true. Yeah. Whereas, yeah, in later films, it does become there's more of a personal sort of element to it often, which is sort of like, yeah, whereas in many of the early films, it's like, oh, it's your job. This is what you do for Queen and country and everything.
Yeah. Do you think that
Yeah.
reflects an attitude towards duty generally in our society? It's something talked about a lot in the newspapers.
It is. No, you are right. No, yeah, I think it does. I think, probably more historically, maybe like, well, I think it's sort of a bit of a, in a lot of films, these days, like, yeah, you could have a movie in the 60s where Bond, there is often sort of like some kind of personal,
Mm.
bent to, even in Goldfinger, it's like Bond is clearly really annoyed that, Jill has been painted gold, and he feels like, that there is a hint of a revenge element to it, but for the most part, like, he's doing it because it's his job, right? And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that he's out to get the villain for some kind of personal vendetta. Whereas now, I think we might be less inclined to just go along with a hero who is just doing a job because that's what he's told, and it's for his government and everything. And I think that's something that's you see more broadly in action films, that the idea that there has to be some personal emotional component to why the hero is doing what they're doing, even if it is, their job. I mean, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, I think he goes rogue in every single one. So, he's not doing it necessarily because it's his job and the government are telling him to do that, but because there is something personal in him that is, driving
Yeah.
him, I guess.
I think he does Craig go rogue in most of them. I think Casino Royale, it is like he's playing Mads Mikkelsen, because that's his job, but it gets
Yeah.
personal later.
Yeah, Quantum, he definitely goes rogue. Skyfall, he just sort of drops out of the service for a bit and then he comes back. Spectre, he goes rogue. No Time to Die, sort of rogue for the majority of that. Then,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's not wild and out there. It's not totally personal. He's doing what he thinks is right.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Well, there's that scene with Felix in No Time to Die, isn't there? Where it's sort of like our elected leaders aren't getting along or something like that. When
Mm.
they're, Bond is going to work for the Americans for a change, and it's sort of like you do get the sense that it's these spies, sort of, whether or not their governments are telling them to do stuff. It's like they're doing it because it is, the right thing to do.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. I feel we may have come to some kind of conclusion about which is the most British Bond film. We seem to have hit on Skyfall, or
for
possibly The Spy Who
me,
Loved Me.
yes, for me, certainly Skyfall is the
Mm.
one. But yeah, no, there are others. I'm curious to see like what people, suggest as like, other like I'm curious if there's sort of like themes that, I might have overlooked or something like that. I'm curious to, yeah, see the discussion on the back of this.
Yeah, I'm very interested. I've been putting out kind of Britishness of Bond films like one by one, and always taking
Mm.
suggestions and people's tips. So if I can reveal, David Zaritsky got in contact and said, "Oh, you should do On Her Majesty's Secret Service," which I
Mm.
totally blanked on. I hadn't thought of that as a particularly British film at all. So I've been
Oh,
pondering that basically since last Christmas.
oh,
Of
interesting.
why would that be a British thing? I think the snobbery is a big part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, but definitely a wide range of perspectives on it.
Mm. Mm. Oh, great.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And you said people can find you online best at YouTube, Calvin
Yep,
Dyson.
YouTube, just Google Calvin Dyson, and yeah, I
Well
should be
worth it.
there.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
No,
Thank you
thank
very
you for having
much.
me on. This has been a really fun discussion. Honestly, I've really yeah, enjoyed. As I say, we see each other at events and stuff, quite frequently. So it's nice to, yeah, hop on, actually get, a discussion recorded.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Calvin Dyson for joining me on this podcast episode. You can find him over on YouTube at Calvin Dyson, and thank you very much for listening.